Come with me. Step outside your house tonight, but not the house you know. Not the one with porch lights casting harsh circles on concrete, or street lamps turning night into an orange-tinted twilight, or windows glowing blue with the flicker of screens. Step outside a different house entirely. A house that existed 300 years ago, in a world you've never known. Here, take my hand in the darkness. Let me guide you down this lane. A lane with no asphalt, no painted lines, no reflectors gleaming in headlight beams. Just packed earth beneath your feet, worn smooth by generations of bare feet and wooden wheels. The air smells of wood smoke and hay, of horses and fresh bread baked hours ago when the sun still warmed these walls. Look around you, though there's almost nothing to see. These cottages beside the path, their windows are dark rectangles against pale stone walls. Not the electric darkness of houses where people sleep behind drawn curtains while phantom lights blink on microwaves and phone chargers. This is true darkness. The darkness of a world that knows only the rhythm of sun and moon, candle flame and ember glow. Listen, do you hear it? Or rather, do you hear what's missing? No hum of electrical current running through wires overhead. No distant highway drone. No air conditioning units cycling on and off. No emergency sirens cutting through the night. No jets drawing white lines across star-filled skies. Just life. The old life. The slow life. The life that breathed in rhythm with seasons and weather, with sunrise and sunset, with the ancient dance of earth and sky. Here, beside this cottage, with its heavy thatch roof and walls of stone and timber, a family sleeps. The Millers, let's call them. Thomas and Anne and their 3 children, all of them sharing the warmth of the single room above the kitchen, their breathing slow and peaceful in the darkness. But they won't sleep all night, not the way you do. In an hour, maybe 2, they'll wake naturally, gently, and spend quiet time together in the darkness before drifting back into rest. They'll wake not from anxiety or insomnia, but from the rhythm their bodies have known for millennia. A rhythm as natural as breathing, as inevitable as tides. This is the world we lost, the night we traded away, the peace we sold for progress, the rest we sacrificed for productivity, the darkness we flooded with artificial light. And tonight I want to take you on a journey from this quiet lane to the world you know, from candlelight to LED screens, from the rhythm of seasons to the tyranny of time clocks, from sleep that flowed like a gentle river to rest that comes fractured and fitful, fought for and rarely won.
What if I told you? What if I told you that your great-great-great-grandparents experienced something every single night that you have probably never known? Something so fundamental to human existence that we didn't even have a word for losing it because we never imagined we could. What if I told you that 150 years ago, a single moment in the vast span of human history, your body's most ancient rhythms were shattered forever? Not by war or plague or natural disaster, but by progress itself, by gaslight and steam engines and the revolutionary idea that darkness was humanity's enemy, waiting to be conquered. You see, there's a secret hidden in the darkness of history, a secret about how sleep was meant to work, written in the very architecture of your brain, encoded in hormones and neural pathways that are millions of years old. For most of human existence, we didn't fight sleep, we danced with it. We didn't struggle against our body's natural rhythms, we moved in harmony with them like partners in an ancient waltz. But then something changed. Something that began with the flicker of gas lamps in London streets and the thunder of water wheels in textile mills. Something that grew into fluorescent offices and all-night diners and smartphones glowing beside our beds. Something that turned rest from a natural rhythm into a nightly battle. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey through that transformation. From villages where families woke peacefully in the middle of the night for conversation and prayer, to cities that never sleep. From candle-lit rooms where children drifted naturally into 10 hours of segmented rest, to fluorescent-lit offices where adults survive on coffee and willpower and 5 hours of fractured sleep. This isn't just a story about the Industrial Revolution. It's a story about you, about why you lie awake at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling, about why that afternoon energy crash feels so inevitable, about why sleep, which should be as natural as breathing, has become something we track on devices, optimize with apps, and discuss in hushed, desperate tones. We're going to move slowly through this story, the way night itself used to move, unhurried, contemplative, with room for silence and reflection. We'll visit cotton mills where children worked 16-hour days, gaslit theaters where the wealthy discovered nightlife, electric laboratories where inventors inadvertently declared war on darkness itself. But we'll also discover the resistance, the communities that fought to preserve natural rhythms, the workers who demanded shorter days, the modern rebels who turn off their screens at sunset and light candles for dinner, the people who remember, in their bodies if not their minds, what it feels like to be truly rested. Along the way, we'll follow a thread, a golden thread that runs through your bloodstream and neural pathways even now. Your circadian rhythm, your body's ancient clock, calibrated by millions of years of sunrise and sunset, seasons and tides, light and darkness. We'll see how that clock was broken, piece by piece, innovation by innovation, until it barely resembles the timekeeper that once governed all human life. And perhaps by the end of our journey, you'll understand not just how we got here, but how we might find our way back, how we might reclaim not just better sleep, but a different way of being in the world, a way that honors the wisdom of darkness, the necessity of rest, the ancient rhythms that still pulse beneath the surface of our electric lives. So let's begin where all journeys into sleep must begin, in the darkness that used to cradle humanity like a mother's arms, in a world where night fell like a blessing rather than an obstacle, where rest came naturally as breathing, where the rhythm of sleep and waking moved in perfect harmony with the turning of the earth itself. Let me tell you about the night we lost and how we might, if we're very quiet and very patient, find our way back to it again. Picture a small English village, maybe 50 souls all told, clustered around a stone church whose bell tower rises against a star-drunk sky. The houses are humble things, timber frames filled with wattle and daub, roofs heavy with thatch that's been darkening all day under gathering clouds. Smoke curls from a few chimneys, thin ribbons of gray against the black. It's only 7 o'clock in the evening, but it might as well be midnight. The sun set 3 hours ago, dropping below the horizon with that startling suddenness of deep winter, taking all warmth and color with it. In the span of 30 minutes, the world transformed from pewter gray to velvet black. Inside the cottages, families have already drawn close to their hearths. Thomas, the blacksmith, banks his forge for the night, the last red glow fading to ash. Mary, the baker's wife, sets aside her mending. Even by the light of a precious beeswax candle, her eyes strain too much in the darkness to continue. One by one, the scattered windows go dark as families retreat to their beds. But here's something beautiful that we've lost. They're not going to sleep for the night. They're going to sleep for now. For the first part of the night, they're settling into what they call, with simple poetry, their first sleep. And in that simple phrase, first sleep, lies a world of difference from everything you know about rest. Listen, can you hear it? The settling sounds of a house preparing for the night, the creak of timber as the day's heat leaves the beams, the soft thump of wooden shutters being latched against the cold, the rustle of straw as bodies nestle into mattresses that will seem impossibly uncomfortable to our modern sensibilities, but that cradle these sleepers with familiar embrace. The family, let's call them the Millers, because the father tends the great stone wheel that grinds grain for the village, they climb the narrow ladder to the loft where they all sleep together. Not from poverty, though they're far from wealthy, but for warmth, for comfort, for the simple animal pleasure of being close to those you love when the world outside grows cold and strange. The parents share the one proper bed, a sturdy oak frame strung with rope and topped with a mattress of straw and, if they're fortunate, a few precious goose feathers. The children curl together on a smaller pallet nearby. 10-year-old Emma, 7-year-old John, and little Sarah, barely 5, who still sometimes wakes crying from dreams she can't name. They say their prayers by the light of a single tallow candle. The flame wavers in the draught, casting dancing shadows on the low ceiling, filling the air with the slightly acrid smell of burning fat. Not unpleasant, really, just the smell of night, of home, of safety against the darkness outside. And then they sleep. But not the way you sleep. Not that heavy, unconscious plunge into 8 hours of nothingness that we consider normal. Instead, they drift into something gentler, something that seems to pulse with the rhythm of their own breathing, their own heartbeats. They sleep for 3 hours, maybe 4. Deep, restorative sleep that carries them away from the day's labor and into dreams that feel more vivid, more meaningful than anything we experience in our truncated modern rest. And then they wake up. It's perhaps 11 o'clock now, maybe midnight. The village is so quiet you can hear the snow beginning to fall, that soft whisper hush of flakes settling on thatch and timber. And all through the darkened houses, people are stirring. Not from anxiety or insomnia, but from the natural rhythm of their bodies, calling them back to wakefulness. This is the watch, that sacred hour or two between first sleep and what they call their second sleep. Master Miller opens his eyes in the darkness and feels content, rested but gently alert. Beside him, his wife Anne stretches beneath the wool blankets, her body warm and relaxed. They don't leap up in panic, checking the time, worrying about what tomorrow will bring. There is only this moment, this peaceful awakening in the heart of night. In the darkness, he reaches for the tinderbox beside the bed, strikes flint against steel once, twice, until a spark catches the charcloth and he can coax a flame to life. By this tiny light, he lights a candle stub, and the room fills with its gentle glow. What happens next is something so foreign to our modern experience that it might sound like fiction, but it's not. It's documented in hundreds of diaries, court records, medical texts, and pieces of literature from across Europe. It's the way humans rested for millennia. Master Miller doesn't lie there stressing about falling back asleep. Instead, he and Anne talk, quietly, intimately, about the day that's past and the one to come, about little Sarah's cough that seems to be improving, about whether the wheat stores will last until spring, about the way the light fell through the kitchen window that afternoon, and how Anne's bread had the perfect golden crust. These aren't the hurried, distracted conversations of daytime. There's something different, deeper. In the gentle darkness, with only the candle flame between them, words seem to carry more weight, more meaning. They share dreams from their first sleep, for dreams in first sleep were vivid and significant, often seeming to carry messages or premonitions. I dreamed of my mother's garden. The roses were blooming, though it was winter in the dream. So strange, but beautiful. This is intimacy as we can barely imagine it now. Conversation untouched by the rush of productivity, the anxiety of deadlines, the constant buzz of a world that never truly goes dark. But not everyone spends their watch in conversation. Throughout the village, others are stirring into their own gentle rituals. In the cottage next door, old Edmund the cooper sits by his dying fire, adding just enough wood to coax a few more flames. He's not wasteful with fuel. Wood is precious, and winter is long. But he allows himself this small luxury during the watch. By the firelight, he reads from his one treasured book, a collection of psalms inherited from his father. The words wash over him in the darkness. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. In the deep quiet of the watch, such words seem to resonate in his bones. This isn't the distracted reading of our modern world, with our minds half on email and phones and television. This is reading as meditation, as communion with something larger than himself. A few doors down, young Margaret tends to her newest baby, born just 2 months ago. The baby has woken for feeding, and she nurses him by the light of a rushlight, a simple reed dipped in fat that gives just enough glow to see by. The baby's small sounds of contentment, the warmth of his body against her, the sweet smell of milk and sleep, these sensations fill her awareness completely. She's not worried about getting back to sleep. She's not calculating how many hours of rest she has left or how tired she'll be tomorrow. She's simply here, in this moment, connected to the most ancient rhythm of motherhood. When the baby is satisfied and drowsy, she'll settle him back into his cradle and drift naturally into her second sleep. And Master Miller? Sometimes he uses his watch for prayer, kneeling by the bedside while Anne continues to rest. Sometimes he checks on the animals, a quick trip to the shed to make sure the cow is comfortable and the chickens are secure against foxes. Sometimes he simply lies quietly, feeling his body's complete relaxation, listening to the small sounds of night.
But here's what's remarkable about all of this. None of them are fighting sleep. None of them lie awake worrying about insomnia or counting hours until dawn. The watch isn't a problem to be solved, it's a gift to be received. Because you see, this pattern of sleep, this natural division of night into two restorative periods, wasn't just a human invention. It was a response to something much deeper, the rhythm of the seasons themselves and our body's ancient wisdom about rest. In the depths of December and January, when night fell at 4 in the afternoon and didn't lift until nearly 8 the next morning, there were 16 hours of darkness to navigate. Our ancestors didn't see this as a problem to overcome with artificial light and stimulation. They saw it as an invitation to a different kind of living. Imagine it, those long winter nights that feel so oppressive to us, so full of seasonal depression and light box therapy, were actually a season of deep rest for our ancestors. A time when the community naturally slowed down, turned inward, embraced a gentler pace of life. During the shortest days of winter, the Miller family might spend 10 or 11 hours in bed, not all of it sleeping, but much of it resting. First sleep from 7 or 8 in the evening until midnight, then the peaceful watch, lasting perhaps an hour, sometimes 2. Then second sleep, deep and dream-filled until dawn began to show itself sometime after 7. This wasn't laziness, this was wisdom. Bodies that had worked hard through the spring planting, the summer growing, and the autumn harvest finally had permission to rest deeply, to restore themselves for the cycle beginning again. And when summer came, when daylight stretched from 4 in the morning until nearly 10 at night, then sleep naturally compressed. First sleep might begin at 10 and last only until 1 or 2 in the morning. A shorter watch, perhaps just 30 minutes to check the animals or say a prayer, then second sleep until dawn called them back to the fields. Can you feel how right this sounds? How aligned with the actual rhythms of light and darkness, work and rest, effort and restoration? But let's return to our winter evening, to the Miller family in their shared loft, because I want you to understand something about the quality of this darkness, the texture of these nights that we've lost. The silence wasn't complete. It never is in the countryside. If you lay very still and listened, you could hear the soft breathing of livestock in the shed attached to the house, the occasional creak of timber settling in the cold, perhaps the distant bark of a dog or the haunting call of an owl hunting in the fields. These weren't the jarring sounds of our modern nights, sirens and traffic and the constant electrical hum of a world that never sleeps. These were the sounds of life continuing its ancient patterns, comforting sounds, sounds that spoke of safety, of continuity, of a world where everything had its proper place. And the smells, oh, the smells were so different from our sanitized modern world. The air in the loft carried hints of wood smoke and tallow, of straw and wool, of the bread baked earlier that day, and the herbs drying from the rafters. When the wind was right,
you might catch a trace of the forge's cold ashes or the sweet scent of hay in the barn. These weren't unpleasant odors. They were the perfume of home, of security, of a life lived in harmony with the seasons and the soil. Little Sarah Miller stirs in her sleep, making the small murmuring sounds that children make when dreams visit them. Her parents don't worry. She's not crying, just talking to whatever friends or adventures her sleeping mind has conjured. In a moment, she settles back into deeper rest. During harvest time, Sarah and her siblings would have worked alongside the adults, their small hands helping to gather grain and tie sheaves. Their bedtime would have been later then, their sleep shorter, but still divided into the ancient pattern of first and second sleep. Even as young as 5, Sarah's body already knew this rhythm. But now, in the heart of winter, she sleeps long and deep, sometimes 10 hours a night, her growing body drinking in rest the way summer fields drink rain. Her dreams during first sleep are vivid and colorful. Adventures in enchanted forests, conversations with talking animals, flights through star-filled skies. During the watch, when her parents whisper together in the darkness, Sarah sometimes half wakes, aware of their voices without understanding the words. But she doesn't feel excluded or anxious. Instead, the sound of adult conversation fills her with deep security. She's surrounded by love, by protection, by the unshakable certainty that all is well with her world. And then she drifts back into second sleep, and her dreams take on a different quality, gentler, more restorative. Dreams of spring flowers and warm sunshine, of her grandmother's stories and the taste of honey from their few precious beehives.
This is what childhood sleep was meant to be, not the hurried, anxiety-ridden rest of modern children, overstimulated and under-rested, but something that unfolded naturally, generously, in harmony with the rhythms of family and season and the ancient wisdom of darkness. Now, I want you to understand something important about the light that existed in this world, because it's crucial to understanding why sleep came so naturally to our ancestors and why it's become so elusive for us. The only light sources available to the Miller family were fire-based, candles made from tallow, animal fat, or the more expensive beeswax, rushlights made from reeds dipped in fat, or oil lamps burning whale oil or olive oil. Each of these gave off light in the warm spectrum, deep golds and ambers and oranges that mimicked the setting sun. This wasn't bright light. Master Miller's single tallow candle cast a circle of illumination perhaps 3 feet across, beyond which darkness reigned complete. Reading by candlelight required holding the book close to the flame, squinting at letters that danced and wavered in the flickering glow. But here's the beautiful thing about this limitation. It meant that when night fell, the body received clear signals that it was time to rest. There was no harsh blue light tricking the brain into thinking it was still daytime. No fluorescent bulbs or LED screens flooding the nervous system with signals to stay alert and active. Instead, as evening approached and families lit their few precious candles, the warm, dim light actually helped ease the transition toward sleep. The gentle amber glow worked with the body's natural circadian rhythms rather than against them. And when those candles were extinguished for the night, when Master Miller blew out the flame after lighting his wife's face one last time before sleep, the darkness was absolute, complete.
the kind of darkness that modern humans rarely experience, even in our bedrooms at night. In that profound darkness, the brain's production of melatonin flowed uninterrupted. Sleep came not as something to be fought for or achieved, but as something that arrived naturally, inevitably, like breathing. But not all nights were equally dark. The Miller family, like all their neighbors, lived by a calendar that we've almost forgotten. The lunar calendar that marked the rhythm of moonlit and moonless nights. On nights when the moon was full, the whole character of darkness changed. Moonlight has a quality unlike any artificial illumination. Silver, where candlelight is gold. Cool, where flame is warm. Mysterious, where fire is familiar. By the light of a full moon, you could walk the village paths without stumbling, work in the garden after sunset, visit neighbors for evening conversation. Court records from the period tell us that more people were abroad on moonlit nights, and unfortunately that more crimes were committed too. But they also tell us something beautiful, that communities planned around the moon's phases. Harvest work might extend into the night when the moon was bright. Young people would court by moonlight. Neighbors would gather to share stories and songs under the silver sky. Master Miller remembers such evenings from his youth. Summer nights when the whole village seemed to come alive after sunset, when moonlight turned familiar fields into landscapes of mystery and romance. He met his Anne on just such a night, walking with her by the mill pond while the moon traced silver paths across the water. But tonight the moon is dark, just a sliver of silver barely visible through the clouds. Tonight is a night for deep rest, for turning inward, for the profound restoration that comes only in complete darkness. During the watch, Master Miller sometimes remembers the stories his own father told during such nights. Tales of spirits that roamed the countryside after midnight, of fairies dancing in moonlit meadows, of saints and angels watching over sleeping families. These weren't just entertainment, they were the way people made sense of night's mystery and power. In a world without artificial light, night was genuinely different from day. It was a time when the ordinary rules seemed suspended, when the boundary between the seen and unseen worlds grew thin. "The night is no man's friend," went an old saying, "for spirits walk and witches dance." But there was also comfort in the darkness, protection in the rituals of bedtime, safety in the knowledge that morning always came. Children learned to navigate this landscape of night through stories and songs that were gentle rather than frightening. Tales of guardian angels watching over sleeping babies, of helpful spirits blessing the homes of good families, of dreams that carried messages from loved ones who had passed away. Anne remembers her grandmother's favorite bedtime blessing: "May the angels watch over your sleeping. May your dreams be filled with light, and may you wake with the sun on your face and joy in your heart." Simple words, but they created a sense of safety and protection that made the darkness welcoming rather than fearsome. This is how our ancestors lived with night, not as something to be conquered or illuminated away, but as a sacred time with its own gifts and mysteries. As the night deepens and snow continues to fall outside the Miller cottage, there's something else happening that we've almost entirely lost touch with. the profound rest that comes from aligning human rhythms with seasonal rhythms. In our modern world, we live at the same pace year-round, the same wake times, the same work schedules, the same artificial light flooding our evenings regardless of whether the sun sets at 5 p.m. or 9 p.m. We've divorced ourselves from the natural world's rhythms and then wonder why we feel exhausted, disconnected, out of sync with our own bodies. But Master Miller and his family live differently. As winter deepens, their bedtime naturally grows earlier. They eat their last meal of the day while the last light fades from the sky. They bank the fire and light a single candle for the final tasks of the day, checking the animals, mending what can be mended, and saying prayers. And then they rest deeply, generously. Their bodies drink in sleep the way drought-stricken earth drinks rain. This isn't laziness, it's biological wisdom. It's what humans are meant to do when the earth itself is resting, when the long nights invite deep restoration. The fields outside lie dormant under their blanket of snow, gathering energy for spring's explosion of growth. The apple trees stand bare-branched and still, their sap slow and deep, conserving strength for the flowering to come. The whole world sleeps, and the Miller family sleeps with it, part of the great rhythm that governs all life.
Can you imagine what it would feel like to live this way? To feel yourself connected not just to your own daily schedule, but to the vast seasonal rhythms that have governed life on Earth for millions of years? Something else remarkable happens in this pattern of segmented sleep. Dreams become more vivid, more meaningful, more integrated into waking life. In first sleep, dreams tend to be intense and colorful, the mind processing the day's experiences, sorting memories, working through emotions. Anne dreams of her sister who lives 2 villages away, sees her clearly kneading bread in a kitchen filled with golden light. Master Miller dreams of the spring planting, feeling in his sleep the satisfaction of seeds falling into dark earth. These first sleep dreams are often remembered clearly upon waking into the watch. Families share them, interpret them, see them as windows into truth or glimpses of things to come. A 1630s French diary records, "My dream in the first sleep foretold a bountiful harvest." And there's no sense that this is superstition, merely the natural wisdom that comes from a mind at rest. But second sleep brings different dreams, gentler, more restorative, often featuring images of beauty and peace. During second sleep, the deeper stages of rest restore the body while the mind drifts through landscapes of healing and renewal. Little Sarah often dreams during second sleep of flying, not the anxious flying dreams that modern people sometimes have, but peaceful soaring over familiar fields and forests, feeling perfectly safe and free. Her brother John dreams of the village fair that comes each summer, with its music and dancing and wonderful smells of honeyed cakes. These dreams weren't separate from life. They were part of life, woven into the fabric of daily experience, shared and valued, seen as another way that rest served not just the body, but the soul. Hours pass, the snow stops falling, and gradually the quality of darkness begins to change. not with any visible light yet. Dawn is still an hour away, but with some subtle shift that sleeping bodies sense even before conscious minds awaken. Master Miller stirs first, as he usually does, not with the jarring alarm of our modern wake-ups, but with a gentle surfacing from second sleep that feels as natural as the slow lightening of sky. He lies still for a moment, feeling completely rested, aware that his body had had the deep restoration it needed. Beside him, Anne continues to sleep peacefully. Her breathing is slow and even, her face relaxed in the dim starlight that filters through the shutters. He doesn't wake her. There's no urgency, no schedule to keep beyond the natural rhythm of daylight and seasonal need. This is winter, after all. The animals need tending, but there's no field work, no harvest urgency. They can afford to let the day begin gently, naturally, as days were meant to begin. In a little while, when the first gray hint of dawn touches the eastern sky, Anne will wake on her own. They'll break their fast together. Bread and ale, perhaps a bit of cheese if they're fortunate, warming themselves by the fire while the world slowly comes alive around them. But for now, there's just this perfect peace, this sense of being completely rested, completely aligned with the natural world, completely at home in their own bodies and their own lives. This is what sleep was like before the world changed, before the machines came and the lights blazed and the ancient rhythms were broken. This is the rest that humanity knew for thousands upon thousands of years, rest that was woven into the very fabric of existence, as natural and essential as breathing. But as Master Miller lies in that pre-dawn darkness, feeling the deep satisfaction of a night well rested, he cannot know what's coming. He cannot see the future rushing toward his peaceful village like a wave of fire and smoke and unprecedented change. Somewhere to the south, in the growing cities of England, something new is stirring. In workshops and laboratories, in the minds of inventors and entrepreneurs, in the vast appetite of a world beginning to hunger for progress and productivity, forces are gathering that will transform everything about human life. The first steam engines are already coughing to life in coal mines. The first water-powered textile mills are already beginning to turn. The first gas lights are flickering in London streets, pushing back the darkness with a harsh, unnatural glare. Change is coming to Master Miller's world. Change so profound that within a generation or two, the way his family sleeps, the rhythm that has governed human rest since the beginning of time, will be seen as primitive, inefficient, a relic of a slower, simpler world. Soon, sooner than anyone can imagine, the night itself will be under attack. But that morning in 1687, as the first birds begin to stir in their roosts and the sky lightens almost imperceptibly towards dawn, none of this has happened yet. The Miller family rests in perfect harmony with rhythms as old as humanity itself. The darkness cradles them like a mother's arms. Their sleep flows in the ancient pattern of tide and retreat, rest and gentle waking, restoration and renewal. Outside their window, a single candle flame flickers in a neighbor's cottage. Edmund the cooper, perhaps, using his watch for prayer or quiet reading. The flame wavers in the draught, casting dancing shadows on his walls. The village night is still and soft, until the hiss of steam and the glow of strange, unblinking light begins to seep into the darkness. A new age is arriving, one that will stretch our days and shrink our rest.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking down a London street in 1806. The cobblestones are slick with evening rain, and the air carries that particular chill that makes you pull your coat a little tighter. Above you, the sky has deepened to that soft indigo that promises true darkness. But something is different tonight. Something that will change the way humans sleep forever. At the far end of the street, there's a sudden, brilliant flare. Not the warm, dancing glow of a candle in a window, but something altogether more powerful. A hiss, like a serpent awakening. And then light. Pure, steady, almost magical light that turns the wet stones to mirrors and makes the night retreat like a startled animal. You're witnessing history, my friend. The very first gas lamp on Pall Mall, casting its ghostly radiance across a world that has never seen anything quite like it. And as you stand there, mesmerized by this new kind of brightness, you have no idea that you're also witnessing the beginning of the end of natural sleep. Let me tell you how it all began, this gentle war between darkness and light that would eventually reach into your own bedroom decades before you were born. Picture William Murdoch, a Scottish engineer with soot-stained hands and eyes that gleam with possibility. In the 1790s, while most people still lived by the rhythm of sunrise and sunset, Murdoch was in his workshop in Birmingham, distilling gas from coal and watching it burn with a flame brighter than anything oil or wax could produce. He probably had no idea that his experiments would one day make it nearly impossible for a factory girl in Manchester to get a full night's rest. But innovations have a way of spreading like ripples across a still pond. By 1807, that first gas lamp on Pall Mall drew crowds who stood in wonder, watching night become something softer, more negotiable. One observer wrote that it created a blaze of light that banishes the gloom of night. And you can almost hear the awe in those words, can't you? The reverence for humanity's new power over darkness itself. Paris followed in 1820, and soon the major cities of Europe were threading themselves with networks of underground pipes, bringing light to boulevards and public squares. By 1823, over 40,000 gas lamps flickered across London's streets, each one a small rebellion against the ancient contract between human beings and nightfall. But here's what's beautiful and tragic about this moment in history. These people thought they were simply making their streets safer, their evenings more pleasant. They had no way of knowing that every lamp was also a tiny thief, stealing something precious from the darkness that had cradled human sleep for millennia. While the gas lamps were claiming the night outside, something equally revolutionary was happening behind the walls of Britain's first factories. Listen carefully, and you might hear it even now. The rhythmic clatter of the spinning jenny, the steady whoosh of James Watt's improved steam engine, and the whispered conversations of workers who were about to discover that sleep itself could become a luxury. In Manchester, Cottonopolis, they called it, textile mills were rising like cathedrals to a new kind of faith. The faith that time was money, that productivity was virtue, that the old agricultural rhythms of work and rest were simply inefficient. Imagine Sarah, a young woman who might have been your ancestor, walking to the mill before dawn. She's part of a grand experiment that neither she nor her employers fully understand. What happens to the human spirit when work becomes separated from the sun's journey across the sky? Her grandmother, back in the village, still woke when roosters crowed and slept when darkness fell, her days shaped by seasons and weather and the ancient wisdom of tired muscles. But Sarah walks to work by gaslight, tends machines under oil lamps that burn steady as artificial suns, and returns home when the real stars are already fading toward dawn. The mills themselves were monuments to humanity's new relationship with darkness. Gas lamps cast their steady glow across rows of spinning frames and looms, creating a world where midnight looked much like noon, where the body's ancient signals, the gradual dimming of light, the gentle cooling of air, were replaced by the constant artificial brightness of industrial ambition. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something was being lost. Not just sleep, though that was certainly being stolen hour by hour, but something deeper, the body's trust in its own rhythms, the soul's connection to the turning of the world. Do you know when the phrase "time is money" first appeared? It was in 1748, in a letter Benjamin Franklin wrote to a young tradesman. He that idly loses 5 shillings worth of time loses 5 shillings. Simple words, but they carried within them the seeds of every sleepless night you've ever had. By the 1790s, factory owners like Richard Arkwright and Josiah Wedgwood transformed Franklin's clever observation into gospel. Factory bells replaced church bells as the rhythm that governed daily life. Wedgwood's factory rules actually fined workers for tardiness, declaring that punctuality is the soul of business. Can you imagine the strangeness of this for someone raised on farm time, where work ebbed and flowed with weather and season and the ancient wisdom of tired muscles? Suddenly, workers were expected to wake not when they felt rested, but when a bell commanded. To work not until a task was finished, but until a clock dictated. To sleep not when darkness and tiredness conspired to close their eyes, but when their remaining hours before the next bell allowed. A Manchester weaver wrote in his diary in 1797, "I rise at 4, work till 9, and scarce sleep 6 hours, for the mill's hum never ceases." 6 hours, when his grandfather might have slept 8 or 9, following the long winter nights that invited deep rest, and the shorter summer nights that encouraged early rising. And oh, the nights themselves were changing. If you could step back into London or Manchester or Birmingham in 1820, your modern ears would be startled by the symphony of the early industrial night. The hiss of gas lamps like 1,000 whispered secrets, the clatter of late carriages on cobblestones, the distant rhythm of steam engines that never slept, breathing their mechanical breath into the darkness. The streets now bustle past midnight as if day never ended, wrote a London merchant in 1818. There's something both wonderful and slightly unsettling about that image, isn't there? Streets that never truly rest, nights that never fully embrace their darkness. Theaters stayed open later under gaslight, their stages bright as day. Taverns welcomed customers long past traditional bedtime. The wealthy discovered the pleasure of evening strolls down illuminated boulevards, while the poor, still living in the shadows between the lamps, found their own nights unchanged except for the distant glow that reminded them of all the light they couldn't afford. But perhaps most importantly, these brighter nights were beginning to whisper to something deep in the human brain, something we now call the circadian rhythm, though the people of 1820 had no name for it. They only knew that the gas lamps, burning at maybe 20 times the brightness of a candle, somehow made it harder to feel sleepy at the proper time. Modern research tells us that even dim artificial light can delay the release of melatonin, the hormone that helps us drift towards sleep. Those early gas lamps, producing maybe 50 to 100 lux of illumination, were easily bright enough to convince the ancient part of the brain that dawn was always just around the corner.
Now, let me tell you about Mary, because her story captures something essential about this moment when sleep first became a luxury rather than a right. Mary worked 14 hours in a Manchester textile mill, standing at her spinning frame from dawn until well past sunset. But Mary's day didn't end when the factory bells released her into the gaslit streets. Like half the women in Britain's industrial cities, Mary carried a double burden that would make 8 hours of sleep seem like an impossible dream. Home she would walk, past the hissing lamps and the late-night revelers, to a small room where supper needed cooking, clothes needed mending, children needed tending, and all of this by the light of oil lamps that allowed domestic work to continue long after the sun had given up its duty. A factory inspector's report from 1819 noted women toiling at home past midnight after their mill shifts, surviving on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, while their male counterparts managed 6 or 7. The new industrial world wasn't just stealing sleep from everyone, it was stealing it unequally, taking the most from those who already had the least power to protect what little rest they could claim. Meanwhile, in the British colonies, this same transformation was beginning to spread like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. In Calcutta, gas lamps were installed in the 1820s to light colonial offices and the growing textile mills. In Bombay, steam engines and artificial lighting were imposing 12-hour shifts on workers whose ancestors had lived by monsoon seasons and festival calendars. Imagine the profound disruption this represented. Societies that had organized their nights around communal storytelling, religious observances, or the natural rhythm of two-phase sleep were suddenly asked to march to the beat of British industrial time. Traditional midnight prayer times, night markets, seasonal celebrations, all of these had to bend around the rigid requirements of machines that never tired and lamps that never dimmed. A Calcutta resident wrote in 1830, "The English clocks rule us now. Our festivals fade under their cold light." There's such sadness in that observation, such recognition that something essential was being lost in the name of efficiency and progress. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this transformation is how gradually it crept into people's lives. Unlike a war or a natural disaster, the theft of natural sleep happened night by night, hour by hour, lamp by lamp. Rural communities still rose with roosters and slept with the stars, maintaining the ancient covenant between human rest and natural darkness. But in the cities, something was shifting.
An 1815 traveler described the contrast perfectly, noting London's ceaseless night activity compared to rural villages' silent dark nights. Those who lived through this transformation couldn't have known they were witnessing one of the most profound changes in human experience since we first learned to make fire. They couldn't have predicted that these early experiments with artificial light and mechanical time would eventually lead to your smartphone glowing beside your bed at midnight, or your third cup of coffee at 2 p.m. because you couldn't fall asleep until well past midnight. They were simply trying to make their streets safer, their factories more productive, their evenings more pleasant. They had no way of knowing that they were also making sleep more elusive, rest more precious, and darkness something to be conquered rather than welcomed. As you settle deeper into your rest tonight, listen for the distant echo of that first gas lamp hissing to life on Pall Mall. Feel the strange parallel between those early London workers walking home past midnight under artificial suns and your own journey towards sleep in a world that never quite turns off its lights. The factory bells have set our pace, but soon the city will no longer sleep at all. A switch will be thrown, and darkness will retreat for good.
Picture, if you will, a morning in Manchester, sometime in the 1830s. The sky is still dark, wrapped in that thick industrial fog that seems to swallow sound itself. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls 5 o'clock, but no one is listening to the church anymore. Instead, they're waiting for the other bell, the one that changed everything. At precisely 6 in the morning, it pierces through the silence like a knife through velvet. Sharp, commanding, unforgiving. The factory bell of McConnell and Kennedy's cotton mill, calling its workers to their machines. And in tenements across the city, people who had been sleeping the deep, natural sleep of their ancestors suddenly jolt awake in darkness. This is the moment when time itself became a cage. For thousands of years, human beings lived by the gentle rhythm of light and shadow. We rose with the sun, worked through the bright hours, rested as evening fell. Our bodies knew this dance by heart, a slow waltz between consciousness and dreams that had been choreographed by millions of years of evolution. But something profound shifted in those early decades of the Industrial Revolution. Something that would reach across 2 centuries to touch your own bedside table, your own morning alarm, your own struggle to find rest in our always-on world. The railways started it, really. Those gleaming iron tracks that began connecting cities needed something that natural time couldn't provide: perfect synchronization. A train leaving Manchester at what the local church called 9 o'clock might arrive in Birmingham to find it was somehow still 8:30 there. Time, you see, had always been local, each town setting its clocks by the sun's position overhead. But trains don't wait for the sun. On November 18th, 1883, they called it the Day of 2 Noons. The railways forced an entire continent to reset their clocks at exactly the same moment. But long before that dramatic day, the mills of Manchester had already surrendered to mechanical time.
By 1847, every major railway in Britain ran on Greenwich Mean Time. By the 1850s, those cotton mills followed suit, their schedules synchronized not with the sky, but with the distant tick of a master clock in London. Picture young Mary stepping out of her family's cramped tenement in the early morning darkness. She's maybe 10 years old, her breath visible in the cold air. The gas lamps flicker weakly along the cobblestone street, casting long shadows that seem to swallow the small figures hurrying toward the mill. Her mother walks beside her, both of them moving with the quick, nervous pace of people who know that being late means losing wages they desperately need. Above them, the factory windows glow with that harsh yellow light of gas flames. The machines inside have been waiting since before dawn, and they don't care that Mary's body is still heavy with sleep, that her natural rhythms are screaming for a few more hours of rest. Inside the mill, time becomes something you can almost touch. It hangs in the air like cotton dust, measured not in the gradual brightening of morning, but in the sharp intervals between bells. 6 o'clock, work begins. 8 o'clock, perhaps a 15-minute breakfast break. 1 o'clock, 30 minutes for lunch. 7 o'clock, if you're lucky, the end of a 13-hour day. The factory rules were precise, almost ritualistic in their exactness. At Quarrybank Mill in Cheshire, the regulations were posted where everyone could see them. Workers must arrive at precisely 6 a.m., not approximately, not when they felt ready, precisely. One Manchester mill worker, writing in his diary in the 1840s, captured the strange new reality. The clocks at the factories were often put forward in the morning and back at night. Time itself had become another tool of production, stretched and compressed to squeeze more labor from tired bodies. Listen to this voice from 1833, a mill worker testifying to a government commission. After 14 hours, my legs tremble, my eyes blur, and I have no time to live. Time to live. Even then, they understood what was being stolen from them. The children. Oh, the children were perhaps the most heartbreaking casualties of this new temporal tyranny. Some as young as 6 years old, working as picers and scavengers, crawling under the massive looms to collect cotton fibers, their small bodies moving in constant danger. A 12-year-old picer testified, "I'm so tired I fall asleep standing. The overseer beats me awake." These children slept only 4 to 6 hours a night, often sharing beds with siblings, their natural sleep cycles completely shattered, while rural children still enjoyed 8 to 10 hours of rest, guided by the ancient rhythm of sunset and sunrise. These urban children lived in a world where exhaustion was simply the price of survival. But something else was disappearing in those gas-lit mills, something most people today have never even heard of. For centuries, our ancestors had practiced what historians now call segmented sleep. They would sleep for a few hours after sunset, then wake naturally around midnight for an hour or two of quiet wakefulness. They called these periods first sleep and second sleep, and the hours in between were sacred time for prayer, quiet conversation, or gentle lovemaking.
Dr. Thomas Hodgkin, lecturing to physicians in 1840, noticed that urban workers had lost this ancient pattern entirely. They slept, he observed, in one unbroken block due to sheer exhaustion from those brutal 12- and 14-hour shifts. Their bodies, pushed beyond natural limits, collapsed into unconsciousness the moment work ended. Meanwhile, in Yorkshire villages and other rural areas, farmers still woke at midnight, still honored those quiet hours between their two sleeps. But in Manchester, in Birmingham, in the growing industrial cities, that gentle rhythm was disappearing as surely as morning mist burns away under a harsh sun. An anonymous worker wrote in 1842, "In the country, we woke at midnight for prayer or talk. In the mill, we sleep like the dead till the bell." Sleep like the dead. What a haunting phrase, and how prophetic, because this was just the beginning of our modern struggle with rest, our ongoing battle against schedules that ignore what our bodies need.
As the Industrial Revolution deepened, a new kind of tyranny entered working people's homes: the alarm clock. Mass production had made these mechanical taskmasters affordable. By the 1870s, you could buy one for just $1.50 in America, 10 shillings in Britain. Suddenly, workers didn't need to rely on factory bells or knocker-uppers to wake them. They could carry the factory schedule right into their bedrooms. An advertisement in the Manchester Guardian from the 1840s marketed these workers' alarm clocks directly to mill employees. The language was telling. These devices promised punctuality for factory hands, as if punctuality was a virtue that needed to be mechanically imposed. One worker, writing in his diary in 1855, captured the strange new relationship between humans and time. "The clock's ring is my master, not the sun." Think about that for a moment. For the first time in human history, people were waking not because their bodies told them to, not because light was filtering through their windows, but because a small metal machine commanded them to consciousness. The alarm clock, as one writer in the Poor Man's Guardian observed in 1850, had become the worker's tyrant, waking us not by nature, but by necessity. Of course, our bodies weren't designed for this. Every cell in our system runs on ancient rhythms, what scientists now call circadian clocks, that expect light at dawn, darkness at sunset, and rest when the day is done. When we force our biology to follow mechanical time instead of natural time, everything begins to break down. Dr. James Kay, studying working conditions in Manchester in 1832, noticed something troubling. The mill workers had developed what he called sallow complexions and nervous debility. They were pale, exhausted, prone to what we might now recognize as anxiety or depression. Night shift workers, he observed, suffered even more, with higher rates of illness and a strange, haunted look in their eyes. The accident records tell their own story. In Manchester mills during the 1840s, 60% of accidents happened after workers had been on their feet for more than 10 hours. Bodies and minds dulled by fatigue, people made mistakes they would never make when rested. Fingers slipped, attention wandered. The machines, which never tired, never needed rest, kept demanding perfection from humans who were running on empty. One doctor of the time observed, "The body breaks when the clock rules." how perfectly he captured what was happening, not just to individual workers, but to our entire species' relationship with time and rest. But even in those dark years, something beautiful was beginning to stir. Workers were starting to understand that this wasn't just about individual exhaustion, it was about reclaiming their humanity from the machine. The 10 Hours movement began in the 1830s, with workers across Britain demanding shorter workdays. Not just for more pay, though they needed that too. They were asking for something more fundamental: time to live. Time to see their children in daylight. Time to sleep as their bodies demanded. Time to be human. In 1842, Manchester workers took to the streets, chanting a simple but powerful demand: "We'll not be slaves to the clock." Their songs told the story of their struggle. The Factory Bell, a popular ballad of the 1840s, lamented that the bell's clang steals our rest, our life, our soul. A petition from Lancashire workers in 1836 put it simply: they wanted time to live, not just to work. What a radical idea, that human beings deserve time not just to labor, but to exist, to rest, to dream. These early labor movements understood something profound that we're still fighting for today: that time belongs to us, not to our machines, not to our employers, not to the endless demands of productivity. They were fighting for the right to sleep, to rest, to live according to rhythms that honored both their humanity and their biology. As you drift toward sleep tonight, consider this: those Manchester mill workers were the first people in human history to experience what billions of us now know intimately: the grinding exhaustion of schedules that ignore our body's needs, the tyranny of alarms that wake us in darkness, the sense that time has become our enemy rather than our friend. But their story, and ours, was just beginning. Under this endless light, a question begins to grow: how far can the human body be pushed before it breaks? The first scientists of sleep are about to find out.
Picture this: a single switch clicks in the darkness. For the first time in human history, night becomes negotiable. The year is 1879, and Thomas Edison has just perfected something that will unravel thousands of years of human rhythm in a single, brilliant moment. Not the light bulb itself. Others had made those before, but something far more dangerous: reliable electric light. Light that doesn't flicker like a candle or dim like gas. Light that transforms darkness from master into servant with the flip of a switch. Close your eyes and imagine walking down Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan on September 4th, 1882. Edison has just opened his Pearl Street station, and for the first time, electric bulbs blaze steadily through the night. The glow isn't the wavering yellow of gas lamps or the warm orange of candle flame. It's something entirely new, bright, constant, almost defiant against the ancient rhythm of sunset. But this isn't just about light. This is about choice. For millennia, humans had lived by a simple, unavoidable truth: when the sun set, activity wound down. You might extend the evening with expensive candles or smoky oil lamps, but eventually, darkness won. Sleep wasn't a decision, it was surrender to the inevitable. The advent of electricity in the late 19th and early 20th centuries allowed for new kinds of public spaces. Suddenly, enormous ballrooms could blaze with light nightly. Gaslighting had already begun to revolutionize theater in the 1810s and 1820s, providing illumination for both house and stage, but electric light took this transformation to the logical extreme. Picture a young couple in 1890, strolling past the glittering marquees of Broadway after midnight. The theaters are alive with light, not the dim, flickering glow their parents would have known, but brilliant electric bulbs that turn night into an extended afternoon. The woman adjusts her coat against the cool air, but she's not hurrying home. Why should she? The streets are lit, the theaters are open, and tomorrow's work feels wonderfully distant. This is the moment sleep became optional. Cities in the 18th and early 19th centuries knew relatively limited nightlife, most of it occurring in drinking places for men. But as electric light spread through urban centers in the 1880s and 1890s, something remarkable happened. The night came alive. Walk with me down the gaslit streets of 1890s New York, London, or Paris. The air hums with more than just electricity. It pulses with possibility. Dance halls glow like jewel boxes, their brass fittings catching and throwing back the steady light of Edison bulbs. As the 19th century wore on, the Victorians certainly did want to dance, requiring new venues in which to mix music and movement, whether a pub or a palace. A factory foreman finishes his shift and instead of trudging home in darkness, finds himself drawn to the warm spill of light from a public house. The streets are safe, well lit, inviting. He can linger over his pint, knowing the walk home won't be a treacherous navigation through pitch-black alleys. For the first time in human history, ordinary working people can extend their social lives well past sunset. Advertisers quickly caught on. Businesses began marketing themselves as never closed or open until the last customer leaves. The phrase, "the city that never sleeps," wasn't born from romance. It was born from commerce, from the sudden realization that night could be just as profitable as day. But listen carefully to what's happening beneath this golden glow of progress. Something fundamental is shifting in how humans think about rest. In the past, sleep had been like hunger or thirst, a biological imperative you eventually had to honor. But electric light created an illusion that human will could triumph over human nature. Etiquette guides and lifestyle publications of the 1890s began discussing ideal bedtimes as matters of personal discipline and social sophistication. Sleep wasn't something that happened to you, it was something you chose to do or chose to postpone. A medical lecture hall in 1895. Dr. Hammond stands at the podium, warning his colleagues about nervous exhaustion sweeping through the electrified cities. Meanwhile, Dr. Richardson argues the opposite, that over-resting and idleness are the real threats to modern health. Two learned physicians looking at the same glowing cities, seeing entirely different dangers. The truth was, nobody really understood what they were unleashing. Melodrama had begun to dominate theater in the 19th century, popularizing departures from neoclassicism and capturing the interest of large audiences. But it wasn't just the stages that became dramatic. The entire urban night took on theatrical qualities. Authors and poets began to romanticize the electric-lit city. The night became mysterious, glamorous, slightly dangerous. Gas lamps created pools of warm yellow light, but electric bulbs made the entire street a stage. Young writers would wander the blazing boulevards until dawn with notebooks in hand, drinking in the energy of a world that refused to sleep. This wasn't just literature reflecting life, it was literature teaching people how to live. Stories and serialized novels in popular magazines portrayed staying up late as sophisticated, urban, modern. Sleep began to feel almost provincial. Here's something those Victorian night walkers couldn't have known. The very light they found so liberating was quietly rewiring their biology. Modern science tells us that electric light, especially the bright and steady light of early bulbs, suppresses melatonin production far more effectively than the dim, flickering light of gas flames or candles. Those couples strolling past midnight theaters weren't just making a cultural choice to stay up later. The bright electric light flooding their eyes was actively telling their brains to postpone sleep, to remain alert, to treat 11 p.m. like 3 p.m. The period from 1894 to 1915 was one in which workers in the United States began to have more leisure time than their predecessors. Industrial employers were shortening work hours and offering Saturday half-days. But instead of using that extra time to rest, people were using it to stay up later, drawn by the glittering promise of electric nightlife. The human circadian rhythm, refined over millions of years of evolution, met its match in Edison's bulb. If you could step into that 1890s ballroom, feeling the warm brass under your hand and seeing the steady glow of electric chandeliers, would you choose to go home early? Would you willingly return to darkness when light offered such freedom? This is the seductive trap that electric light set for our sleep. It made rest feel like giving up, like missing out, like choosing darkness when light was freely available. For the first time in human history, staying awake became an act of will rather than an act of necessity. The night had been conquered. The question nobody was asking yet was, at what cost? As the last theater-goers made their way down the electric-lit streets and the final dance halls closed their doors, a new kind of exhaustion was settling over the glowing cities. Some doctors were beginning to notice it, taking careful notes on their patients' complaints of tiredness despite adequate rest. Others were studying factory workers, measuring productivity, tracking the strange phenomenon of people who slept enough hours but somehow never felt rested. The factory floor becomes the battlefield of fatigue, and soon the war against sleep will go global.
Picture a railway signal box on a December night in 1879, somewhere along Scotland's wind-swept coast. The signalman sits hunched over his levers, eyelids heavy as lead. He's been awake for 24 hours straight. Company policy, they call it efficiency. Outside, the Tay Bridge stretches into darkness, and a passenger train approaches through the storm. His hand hovers over the signal lever. Just for a moment, his eyes close. 75 souls would perish that night when the bridge collapsed, and in the inquiry that followed, buried in pages of technical testimony about metal fatigue and wind loads, investigators would note something else entirely: human fatigue. The signalman's 24-hour shift, his diminished alertness, the way exhaustion had clouded his judgment just when clarity mattered most. But here's what makes this story different from all the industrial disasters before it. By 1879, scattered across Europe and America, a handful of scientists were already beginning to understand why that signalman's eyes grew heavy. They were mapping the contours of sleep, measuring the weight of fatigue, documenting what happens when we push the human body beyond its natural limits. They were trying to warn us. We just weren't listening. In a dimly lit laboratory in Germany, Ernst Kohlschitter conducted what may have been the world's first scientific measurement of sleep. The year was 1863, and his subjects lay still while he tested their responses to carefully calibrated sounds, dropping metal balls, ringing bells,
calling their names with increasing volume. He was trying to map sleep's depths, to understand how consciousness ebbs and flows through the night. Kolschitter's charts revealed something remarkable. Sleep wasn't uniform. It had patterns, rhythms, a natural architecture that deepened and lightened in predictable waves. But his work, published as Experiments on Determining the Strength of Sleep, would gather dust in academic journals, while factory owners pushed workers through 16-hour shifts and railway companies scheduled signalmen for round-the-clock duty. The irony was exquisite. Just as science was discovering sleep's complex choreography, industry was learning to dance around it entirely. Across Europe, other researchers followed similar threads. In St. Petersburg, Marie de Montaigne subjected puppies to relentless wakefulness, watching their small bodies collapse as they reached the edge of death. Her 1894 study, Some Experimental Observations on the Influence of Absolute Insomnia, proved what anyone who'd missed a few nights' sleep already knew. Prolonged wakefulness wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal. But even as de Montaign's laboratory filled with the grim evidence of sleep's necessity, factories across the industrial world hummed through the night, their workers swaying on their feet, their owners counting profits by the hour.
At the University of Iowa in 1896, George Patrick and J. Allen Gilbert convinced volunteers to stay awake for 90 hours straight. It was perhaps the first controlled study of sleep deprivation in humans, and the results were as predictable as they were disturbing. Cognitive function crumbled. Physical coordination failed. The volunteers' minds began to fray at the edges, reality becoming negotiable, time losing its meaning. Patrick and Gilbert documented it all with clinical precision, publishing their findings in Psychological Review as On the Effects of Loss of Sleep. But even as their data painted a clear picture of human limits, the industrial world was designing systems that pushed workers far beyond those boundaries. In textile mills, miners worked double shifts underground. Railway engineers piloted trains through the night, their vision blurred by exhaustion. Factory workers tended dangerous machinery while fighting the weight of their own eyelids. The scientists were mapping the territory of human endurance, just as industry was learning to exploit every square inch of it. Angelo Mosso, working from his laboratory in Turin, approached fatigue from a different angle. His ergograph, a device that measured muscle exhaustion, could chart the precise moment when human strength began to fail. His 1891 book, La Fatiga, Fatigue, became an instant classic in industrial circles, not because it advocated for worker rest, but because it promised to optimize human output. Mosso's graphs and charts were beautiful in their stark simplicity. They showed exactly how much work a human body could perform before performance degraded. Factory owners studied his findings with the intensity of military strategists, looking for ways to extract maximum effort before exhaustion set in. But notice what was missing from these conversations. No one asked whether pushing workers to their physiological limits was wise, or kind, or sustainable. The question was always, how much further can they go? The warnings were there, written in blood and twisted metal. The Tay Bridge collapse of 1879, the Spring Hill mining disaster of 1891, where 125 miners died after fatigued workers missed critical safety checks. The Monongah explosion of 1907, which killed 362 men when fatigued miners failed to detect methane buildup in the tunnels. Each disaster was followed by an investigation. Each investigation noted the role of worker fatigue. Each report recommended reforms, and each set of recommendations was quietly filed away, defeated by the simple economics of continuous operation. The coal mine owners in Wales funded studies that proved shorter shifts reduced accidents. Then they ignored the results. Textile manufacturers in Lancashire commissioned research showing that exhausted workers made more errors. Then they extended the shifts anyway. Railway companies documented the link between fatigue and crashes. Then they scheduled signalmen for longer hours. The pattern was as clear as it was tragic. Industry would pay for the science, then disregard the findings whenever they conflicted with profit. While civilians struggled with the consequences of industrial sleep deprivation, military researchers were perfecting the art of artificial wakefulness. In Prussian army camps, soldiers were fed experimental stimulants, concentrated coffee extracts, early forms of caffeine tablets, anything that might keep them alert during forced marches. By World War I, the British Army Medical Corps was conducting systematic trials of caffeine on soldiers in the trenches. 200 milligrams could boost alertness for 4 to 6 hours, they discovered, though it came with side effects, tremors, irritability, and eventually collapse. But the military approach was different from the industrial one, where factory owners simply demanded more hours from exhausted workers. Military researchers actively sought chemical solutions to biological limits. They weren't just ignoring sleep, they were engineering ways around it. These experiments would filter back into civilian life. Coffee breaks became standard in munitions factories after military studies proved their effectiveness. Caffeine tablets moved from barracks to break rooms. The military's chemical approach to wakefulness was becoming the industrial standard. Perhaps the most prescient insight came from an unlikely source. In 1855, Scottish philosopher Alexander Bain observed in The Senses and the Intellect that human performance varied predictably throughout the day and night. We had natural rhythms, he argued, and disrupting them carried costs. Decades later, William James expanded on this idea in his Principles of Psychology, noting that forcing people to work against their diurnal rhythms led to errors and accidents. Night shift workers, he observed, never fully adapted. Their bodies remained anchored to the rhythms of daylight, no matter how long they worked in darkness. These insights, early glimpses of what we now call chronobiology, were revolutionary. They suggested that the industrial schedule wasn't just difficult for workers, it was fundamentally incompatible with human biology. Fighting the body clock was not a test of character or willpower. It was a losing battle against millions of years of evolution. But in 1908, when a British railway study recommended shifting signalmen to daytime schedules to reduce accidents, the companies balked. 24-hour operations were too profitable to abandon. The body clock's rebellion would have to be crushed, not accommodated. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, a quiet conspiracy was taking shape. Scientists understood the dangers of sleep deprivation with increasing clarity. Industrial leaders commissioned studies that confirmed these risks. Military researchers developed tools to temporarily overcome biological limits. And yet the knowledge was carefully contained. Research was funded by those who benefited from ignoring its implications. Scientists whose work threatened productivity found their funding cut. Workers who complained of exhaustion were dismissed as lazy or weak. The industrial world had learned to metabolize scientific knowledge selectively, embracing discoveries that enhanced efficiency while discarding those that suggested limits or restraint. Sleep research was transforming from a search for truth into a tool for optimization. In Manchester textile mills, workers toiled under gas lamps, their natural rhythms shattered by the demands of round-the-clock production.
In Birmingham munitions factories, women worked 14-hour shifts, their exhaustion reframed as patriotic duty. In railway signal boxes across Britain, men fought to keep their eyes open while controlling the movement of tons of steel and steam. The science was there. The warnings were clear that the industrial machine had developed its own logic, its own momentum, its own appetite for human hours that no amount of research seemed capable of satisfying. As you drift toward sleep tonight, consider this. Those early researchers, Kohlschutter with his carefully calibrated sounds, Dumonacina with her tragic experiments, Patrick and Gilbert with their 90-hour vigils, were documenting something profound about human nature. They were discovering that sleep wasn't a weakness to be overcome or an obstacle to be engineered around. It was a fundamental requirement, as essential as food or water or air. But their warnings fell on ears deafened by the roar of machinery and the whisper of profit. The 20th century would take their carefully documented insights and use them not to protect human sleep, but to optimize its destruction. The age of industrial sleeplessness was just beginning, and in the laboratories and boardrooms and military bases of the new century, scientists and strategists were already asking the next logical question. If we can measure fatigue so precisely, if we can map sleep's architecture so completely, if we can chemically override the body's demands for rest, what else might be possible? The answer would reshape not just how we work, but how we live, how we think, and ultimately, how we sleep or don't sleep. The researchers of the 1890s were opening a door to understanding human limits. The 20th century was about to walk through it and slam it shut behind them.
Picture a street in Manhattan, midnight, 1900. Gas lamps cast pools of amber light on cobblestones, still wet from evening rain. A lone police officer walks his beat, his footsteps echoing off shuttered storefronts. Most windows are dark. The city sleeps, as cities have always slept. When the sun goes down, so do its people. Now, picture the same street 50 years later. Neon signs buzz and flicker in electric blues and reds, advertising theaters that won't close for hours. Diners serving coffee to third-shift workers. Bars where jazz music spills out onto sidewalks alive with people. The night has become a different country entirely. One where sleep is no longer a given, but a choice you might not have time to make. This is the story of how the 20th century didn't just change when we slept, it changed what night itself meant to be human. The hum that never stopped. It began as so many revolutions do, with the simple desire to make things faster. In 1913, at a Ford plant in Highland Park, Michigan, Henry Ford watched his moving assembly line reduce the time to build a Model T from 12 hours to 90 minutes. But here's what the history books often miss. That efficiency came with a sound, a low mechanical hum that Ford realized didn't have to stop when the sun went down. By 1915, that hum was running through the night. Workers arrived as others left, their shifts overlapping like gears in the very machines they operated. For the first time in human history, factories had learned to dream with their eyes open. The night shift worker at Ford, let's call him Thomas, would arrive at the plant as streetlights flickered on, his lunch pail heavy in his hand. Inside, electric bulbs cast harsh shadows across the assembly line.
turning the familiar rhythms of day shift work strange and otherworldly. His body would fight him for the first few weeks, demanding sleep when the work demanded wakefulness. But gradually he adapted. The human circadian rhythm, that ancient internal clock that had governed our species for millennia, learned to bend. What Thomas couldn't know was that he was part of an experiment, not just in manufacturing efficiency, but in human biology itself. Then came the wars, and with them, a different kind of urgency. During World War I, munitions factories across America and Europe discovered that the war effort couldn't pause for something as civilian as a good night's sleep. In steel mills from Pittsburgh to Birmingham, the forge fires burned around the clock. War Industries Board reports from 1916 document the expansion. Night shifts weren't just permitted, they were essential. Sleep became unpatriotic. A steelworker in 1917 might finish his shift at dawn, walk out into a world where other people were just beginning their day, and understand for the first time what it meant to live against the grain of natural time. The sun rising felt like an accusation. By World War II, this had become doctrine. At the Kaiser shipyards in California, over 90,000 workers moved in waves across 3 shifts, building Liberty ships in 4 days that had once taken months. The shipyard never slept, never paused, never acknowledged that human beings might need more than a few hours of rest between shifts. One worker described the strange democracy of the night shift. Executives and laborers alike, unified by the pale fluorescent lights and the shared understanding that normal time had been suspended. They were building ships, yes, but they were also building something else, a new relationship with consciousness itself. As factories learned to run through the night, cities began to follow their lead. New York's population surged from 3.4 million in 1900 to 7.8 million by 1950. But it wasn't just the number of people that changed, it was how they filled their time. The subway system, which had opened in 1904, extended its service deeper into the night by the 1920s. Suddenly, the city had a circulatory system that could pump people through its streets at any hour. In 1925, a New York Times article described Times Square's electric blaze. Neon signs advertising theaters, restaurants, and nightclubs that treated midnight not as an ending, but as an intermission. The city that never sleeps wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was an economic strategy. London followed suit, its West End filling with jazz clubs where musicians finished their sets at dawn and walked out into streets where milk trucks were making their rounds. Tokyo, rebuilding itself after the war, designed its Ginza district around the assumption that night was simply another shift to work, another market to capture. These cities didn't just grow larger, they grew deeper, extending their influence not just across space, but across time. A banker in London could stay up past midnight to catch the opening of Tokyo markets. A jazz musician in New York could finish a set and catch a late showing of a film that had premiered that evening. Time zones meant less when your own city refused to observe the basic rhythm of day and night.
But perhaps the most intimate transformation happened not in factories or city centers, but in living rooms across the country. Radio arrived in the 1930s with the promise of bringing the world into your home. What it actually brought was the assumption that your evening,
Your quiet time, your family time, your sleep preparation time could be filled with something else. Stations like WABC began broadcasting through the night, offering late-night variety shows, serialized dramas, and music programs that stretched toward dawn. By the 1960s, television had arrived with an even more seductive proposition. The BBC launched late-night broadcasts, and American families found themselves staying up past midnight to catch the conclusion of their favorite programs. A 1965 Gallup poll found that 30% of Americans regularly stayed up past midnight watching TV, not because they needed to be awake, but because there was finally something worth staying awake for. Picture a family in their living room in 1965. The blue glow of the television casting strange shadows on their faces. The house quiet, except for the murmur of late-night programming. The children have long since gone to bed, but the parents remain, caught in that hypnotic space between entertainment and exhaustion. They tell themselves they'll turn it off after this program, but there's always another program, always something else worth watching. Sleep, which had once been the natural conclusion to a day's activity, became something you had to actively choose over increasingly appealing alternatives. The 1980s brought pagers, and with them the revolutionary idea that work could reach you anywhere, anytime. A manager in 1990 might finish dinner with her family, put the children to bed, and then hear the electronic beep that meant someone, somewhere, needed her attention. Harvard Business Review documented cases of executives receiving work calls at midnight, of employees checking messages from their beds, of the very concept of off hours beginning to dissolve. The phone call at midnight, the emergency that couldn't wait until morning, the client in a different time zone who expected immediate responses. These weren't aberrations, they were the new normal. Work-life balance wasn't just harder to maintain, the very boundaries that had once made balance possible were disappearing. An American Psychological Association study from 1985 found that workers on call reported higher anxiety and sleep disturbances, not just from working irregular hours, but from never knowing when work might intrude on their rest. Sleep became conditional, always subject to interruption, always secondary to the demands of professional life. This wasn't just an American or European phenomenon. Through colonialism and trade, industrial schedules were exported around the world, often clashing violently with local rhythms of life. In India, British colonial factories introduced shift work to textile mills, forcing workers to abandon centuries-old patterns of work that had been synchronized with monsoons, seasons, and community festivals. Indian Industrial Commission reports from 1918 document the resistance. Workers who simply couldn't adapt to the arbitrary division of day and night that British efficiency demanded. In mining operations across colonial Africa, 24-hour production schedules were imposed on communities whose entire social structure had been built around solar rhythms. Night work wasn't just physically difficult, it was spiritually disorienting, separating workers from the communal activities that had defined their sense of time and belonging. Gandhi's Swadeshi movement wasn't just about economic independence, It was about temporal sovereignty, the right to determine when your community worked and when it rested, the right to sleep according to the rhythms that had sustained your culture for generations, rather than the demands of distant markets and colonial efficiency. Some communities adapted by creating high-grid systems, night shifts paired with traditional communal gatherings, industrial work integrated with seasonal celebrations. But often, adaptation came at the cost of cultural erosion. Time, it turned out, wasn't neutral. When you changed how a community related to day and night, you changed the community itself. Not everyone embraced the sleepless century. In rural French villages throughout the 1970s, seasonal work patterns persisted despite pressure to adopt urban 24-hour schedules. Farmers, bakers, and craftspeople maintained rhythms that acknowledged the natural world, working with the sun, resting with the moon, treating sleep not as downtime, but as an essential part of the cycle of productivity. The counterculture movement of the 1960s made sleep a political statement. Communes like The Farm in Tennessee prioritized natural sleep cycles, viewing sleep as rest and not as the absence of consciousness. They weren't just rejecting corporate work schedules, they were reclaiming their circadian rhythms as a form of resistance.
Indigenous communities around the world maintained their own temporal traditions despite pressure to adopt industrial time. Australian Aboriginal communities preserved dream time-based rhythms, treating sleep not as the absence of consciousness, but as access to a different kind of awareness entirely. These resistance movements understood something that the industrializing world was forgetting. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was connection to natural rhythms, to community cycles, to ways of being that couldn't be optimized or scheduled or made more efficient.
By the 1970s, scientists had begun to document what night shift workers had known instinctively. The human body wasn't designed for this. Research by Nathaniel Kleitman revealed that working against natural circadian rhythms suppressed melatonin production, disrupted core body temperature cycles, and fundamentally altered the hormonal systems that regulated everything from appetite to immune function. Night workers weren't just tired, they were biologically displaced, living in a constant state of internal disagreement. A 1970 Journal of Physiology study showed that rotating shift workers, those who moved between day and night shifts, experienced the worst disruption of all. Their bodies never had time to adapt to one schedule before being forced to adjust to another. They lived in permanent jet lag, in their own cities, in their own lives. The health consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. Higher rates of cardiovascular disease among shift workers, increased depression and anxiety, metabolic syndrome, shift work disorder, a condition that didn't even have a name until the century was almost over, because the problem it described hadn't existed before industrial time made it inevitable. The experience of sleeplessness looked different in different cities, but it was spreading everywhere. In New York, the 24-hour culture emerged organically. Jazz clubs staying open until dawn, diners serving coffee to cab drivers and night workers.
a city that hummed with activity because activity was profitable. The social fragmentation was real, families eating dinner in shifts, children sleeping while parents worked, neighborhoods where half the residents were awake while the other half tried to sleep. Tokyo's transformation was more deliberate. Post-war reconstruction emphasized 24-hour infrastructure as a symbol of modernity and economic power. The rise of salaryman culture in the 1960s meant that work didn't end with the business day. It extended into evening socializing, late-night drinking, and early morning commutes that compressed sleep into whatever hours remained. In both cities, sleep became something you grabbed between other activities rather than the foundation around which other activities were organized. The phrase, "I'll sleep when I'm dead," wasn't dark humor, it was a lifestyle philosophy. By the end of the 20th century, something fundamental had shifted in human experience. For the first time in our species' history, large populations of people were living primarily by artificial light, working in schedules determined by economic rather than biological necessity, and treating sleep as a luxury rather than a requirement. The night had been colonized, and most people couldn't remember what it had been like before. A factory worker in 1999 might finish a night shift, drive home past 24-hour gas stations and grocery stores, and realize that somewhere in the past 100 years, his society had decided that darkness was simply inefficiency waiting to be solved. The stars were still there, but you had to work harder to see them past the electric glow that never dimmed. The question wasn't whether this was progress or decline. It was whether human beings could adapt to a relationship with time that had no precedent in evolutionary history. Whether we could maintain our health, our families, our sense of meaning in a world that treated sleep as a negotiable. What none of them could know, as the 20th century drew to a close, was that the transformation was just beginning. The Sleepless Century had created the infrastructure for something even more ambitious, a corporate culture that wouldn't just accept sleep deprivation as a side effect of modern life, but would celebrate it as a virtue. The assembly lines were humming, the city lights were blazing, the televisions were glowing in living rooms where families learned to live against their own biology. And somewhere in glass towers that stayed lit all night, executives were developing new ideas about what it meant to be productive, what it meant to be dedicated, what it meant to sacrifice sleep not just for survival, but for success. If the sun no longer decided when we slept, what would?
Picture this. Manhattan, 1963. 3 o'clock in the morning. The city sleeps, but high above the darkened streets, a single window glows amber in a glass tower. Inside, a man in a wrinkled white shirt leans over quarterly reports, his coffee cup long since drained, his eyes bloodshot but determined. He's not here because he has to be. He's here because he wants to be. Because somewhere along the way, America decided that closing your eyes was the first step toward losing the race. This is the story of how we learned to fear our own biology. The 1950s arrived like a promise wrapped in chrome and cigarette smoke. The war was won, the suburbs were blooming, and corporate America was building itself into something magnificent and terrible. In glass-walled conference rooms across the country, a new mythology was taking shape. One where sleep wasn't rest, but retreat. Where exhaustion wasn't a warning, but a badge of honor. When did closing your eyes become a sign of weakness?
Thomas J. Watson Jr. of IBM said it best in a 1965 interview, his words echoing through executive suites from coast to coast. He thrived on 5 hours of sleep, he claimed, calling it his competitive advantage. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, seductive and toxic. Soon, boardrooms filled with men comparing their sleep deprivation like war stories, each trying to outdo the other in a contest nobody could win. The rules were unspoken, but absolute. The ideal worker was tireless, dedicated, always available. Sleep was a luxury, something for the weak, the uncommitted, the ones who would inevitably fall behind. Companies like General Motors and IBM didn't need to write this into their employee handbooks. It lived in the late-night phone calls, the weekend meetings, the knowing nods when someone stumbled in at dawn still wearing yesterday's suit. But even the most dedicated warriors needed fuel for their battle against biology. Enter the coffee break, a 15-minute salvation that swept through American workplaces like a caffeinated revival meeting. Picture a 1950s office, the sharp click of heels on linoleum, the whistle of steam from industrial coffee percolators, the gentle clink of ceramic cups on saucers. Workers gathered around these altars of alertness, their conversations mixing with the bitter aroma of overbrewed coffee. The Pan American Coffee Bureau knew what they were selling. Their 1952 campaign wasn't just about flavor, it was about endurance. Give yourself a coffee break and get what coffee gives you to you. What coffee gave was permission to ignore the body's pleas for rest. Maxwell House understood the assignment perfectly. Their ads featured men in narrow ties and horned-rimmed glasses hunched over desks as city lights twinkled beyond their office windows. Maxwell House keeps you sharp when the hours get long, the tagline promised, transforming exhaustion into virtue, sleeplessness into strategy. By the 1960s, no-dos appeared on pharmacy shelves like tiny white promises. Stay alert, the bottles commanded, as if consciousness itself was a choice, a matter of willpower, rather than biological necessity. The secretary who popped one at 2 p.m. wasn't fighting fatigue, she was fighting failure. Lee Iacocca, the man who would later save Chrysler from collapse, had a confession that sounded more like a boast. I get by on 4 hours a night. Sleep is for those who don't have enough to do. It was 1978, and his words crystallized 2 decades of corporate mythology into a single, devastating sentence. These weren't just personal habits, they were cultural performances. Every time an executive bragged about his minimal sleep in the pages of Fortune or Business Week, he was writing the script for thousands of middle managers, analysts, and ambitious strivers who read those magazines like sacred texts. How did a basic human need get rebranded as an obstacle to success? On Wall Street, young analysts wore their exhaustion like expensive suits. 80-hour weeks became the entry fee to the American dream, and sleep became the enemy of ambition. The phrase, "you snooze, you lose," wasn't just clever wordplay. It was a warning, a threat, a promise that rest would be punished by irrelevance. But beneath the polished veneer of endless productivity, something was breaking. In 1964, a study buried in the Journal of the American Medical Association revealed a troubling truth. 30% of American workers were sleeping less than 6 hours a night. Workplace accidents increased, errors multiplied, marriages strained under the weight of partners who came home not just tired, but fundamentally depleted. Yet the machinery of denial churned on. When someone nodded off in a meeting, it wasn't seen as a sign of systemic overwork. It was a personal failing. When errors accumulated, the solution wasn't rest, but
but more coffee, more stimulants, more determination to push through the body's rebellion. Sleep disorders went unrecognized, dismissed as weakness rather than medical conditions. Insomnia was a character flaw. Sleep apnea didn't have a name. The very idea that sleep might be essential, not optional, barely existed in corporate consciousness. Electric lights hummed in offices long after sunset, severing the ancient contract between humans and the natural world. Circadian rhythms, the internal clocks that had guided our species for millennia, became inconvenient obstacles to overcome rather than wisdom to honor. Night shifts proliferated in factories and hospitals. The human body, calibrated by eons of evolution to rest when darkness fell, found itself thrust into an artificial noon at midnight. Workers adapted because they had to, their biology bending but never breaking, accumulating a debt that would compound with interest over decades. The cultural message was clear. Your body's needs were suggestions, not requirements. The successful person was the one who transcended biology, who conquered their own humanity in service to productivity. As the 1970s wound down, the stage was set for something even more invasive than caffeine-fueled all-nighters or sleep-bragging executives. The corporate world had successfully reframed sleep as weakness, rest as laziness, and exhaustion as virtue. But they had no idea what was coming. In laboratories across Silicon Valley, engineers were building something that would make the coffee break look quaint. The all-night office sessions seem almost peaceful by comparison. The corporate sleep crisis of the mid-20th century taught us to ignore our bodies. But the digital revolution was about to teach us something far more dangerous: how to never truly be alone with our own minds, how to stay connected even in the sacred darkness, how to carry the office into the very sanctuary of sleep itself. What happens when the boundary between work and rest doesn't just blur, but disappear entirely? As you close your eyes tonight, consider this. The man in that Manhattan office tower in 1963, burning through another sleepless night, thought he was winning. He had no idea he was just the opening act in a much longer performance, one that would eventually transform not just how we work, but how we dream, how we love, and whether we can ever truly find peace in the dark. But if the mid-century glorified exhaustion, the decades ahead would find new ways to invade the bedroom, glowing, buzzing, and demanding our attention.
Picture this. It's 11:47 p.m. The house is quiet. The street lights dim through your curtains. But there, in the darkness of your bedroom, a small rectangle of light illuminates your face with an ethereal blue glow. Your thumb moves in slow, hypnotic scrolls. Just one more post, one more video, one more refresh. We've done something curious to the night, haven't we? Something our grandparents would find both miraculous and deeply unsettling. We've taken the oldest rhythm our bodies know, the gentle fade from light to dark, from wakefulness to rest, and we've punctured it with 1,000 tiny suns. Let me take you back to a quieter time. Picture a suburban home in 1985. The family computer, if there was one, sat in the den like a beige monument, humming softly to itself. Its green text screen flickered occasionally, casting ghostly shadows on wood-paneled walls. The bedroom was still a sanctuary then, a place where darkness meant rest and silence meant peace. But technology, like water, finds its way into every space.
First came the laptops in the 90s. Portable, they whispered, take your work anywhere. And we did, including to bed. The soft glow of LCD screens began their quiet invasion, one late-night email at a time. The dial-up modem's electronic song became the lullaby of a new generation, that familiar screech and hum promising connection to something vast and wakeful. By the 2000s, the first smartphones arrived like digital seeds, innocent enough. BlackBerry users called them crackberries, joking about their addictive pull. They didn't know they were the early adopters of something that would reshape the very architecture of human rest. Then came 2007, the iPhone. Suddenly, the entire internet fit in your palm, and your palm fit perfectly under the covers. Here's what we didn't understand then, what we're only beginning to grasp now. That gentle blue glow isn't just light. It's a chemical messenger speaking directly to the most ancient parts of our brain in a language older than words. For millions of years, blue light meant one thing: morning, dawn, time to wake up. Our ancestors rose with the sun because their bodies had no choice. Blue wavelengths flooding through their eyes commanded their brains to stop producing melatonin, that delicate hormone that pulls us towards sleep. But now we bathe ourselves in artificial dawn at midnight. Every scroll through social media, every binge-watched episode, every work email answered in bed, it's as if we're holding a piece of the morning sun inches from our faces, whispering to our hypothalamus, stay awake, stay alert, the day isn't over yet. We've become gas lamp citizens of the 21st century, except our lamps are brighter, colder, and never burn out. When did we decide our days should have no natural ending? Somewhere in the early 2000s, as email became ubiquitous and global business never slept, a new expectation crept into our collective consciousness. The idea that being unreachable was somehow irresponsible, that a delayed response was a missed opportunity. Picture Maria, a software developer in San Francisco, lying in bed at 11 p.m. Her phone buzzes, a Slack message from her colleague in Mumbai, just starting his workday. The blue light pierces the darkness as she reads, "Quick question about the client demo." Just a quick response, she thinks, but one message becomes five becomes a full conversation, and suddenly it's past midnight, her mind buzzing with problem-solving energy when her body desperately needs rest. This scene plays out millions of times each night across time zones and professions. The gig economy worker in Chicago taking a last-minute ride request at 1 a.m., the freelance designer in Berlin revising logos for a New York client, the nurse checking her schedule, the teacher grading papers, the parent scrolling through tomorrow's weather, all of us carrying the weight of an awakened world into our sacred hours of rest. Here's where the story takes an almost comical turn. As we began to realize we had a problem, that our sleep was fragmenting, our rest becoming restless, technology stepped forward with a solution. Sleep apps, fitness trackers, smart mattresses that monitor our breathing, blue light filters that promise to tame our screen's harsh glow. "Let us help you sleep better," they whispered. "Just keep your phone next to your pillow. We'll track your REM cycles. We'll optimize your rest." The very devices that stole our sleep now promise to give it back for a small monthly subscription fee. Some of these tools help genuinely, but there's something deeply ironic about using the thing that broke our rest to fix our rest. It's like treating a burn with fire, hoping this flame will be gentler than the last.
but in coffee shops and yoga studios, in book clubs and bedrooms, a quiet rebellion began to stir. Digital detox, people started saying. Phone-free bedrooms, screen-free Sundays. Authors wrote bestsellers about why we sleep. Wellness influencers posted photos of charging stations outside bedroom doors. In France, workers won the legal right to disconnect after hours. In South Korea, rehabilitation centers opened for smartphone addiction. These weren't Luddites rejecting progress. They were modern people trying to remember what it felt like to end a day completely, to let thoughts settle like silt in still water, to trust that the world would survive a few hours without their immediate attention. Some discovered the strange pleasure of reading physical books again, their pages warm under lamplight instead of cold under LED glow. Others began placing their phones in kitchen drawers at 9 p.m., creating islands of silence in their evenings. But for every one who stepped back, 10 others scrolled deeper. The blue light brigade marched on, one notification at a time. Think about your own relationship with that last light. You know the one I mean, that final check of your phone before sleep. It starts innocently enough, just seeing if anything important happened, just a quick look at the news, at messages, at the endless feed of other people's highlights and heartbreaks. But screens don't want to let you go. They're designed with the infinite scroll, the autoplay, the gentle buzz of intermittent rewards. They've gamified our attention, turning every swipe into a small bet. Will this post be worth it? Will this video make me laugh? Will this message be the one I've been waiting for? And so you find yourself, like millions of others, caught in that blue glow at midnight. Your body producing less and less melatonin, your mind growing more alert just when it should be growing quiet. Your circadian rhythm, that ancient conductor of your body's symphony, losing track of when the music should end. We're living through something unprecedented in human history. Never before have so many people carried concentrated doses of artificial daylight into their most private and restful spaces. Never before has the boundary between day and night become so blurred, so negotiable. The gas lamps of the 19th century extended our evenings, yes, but they flickered and dimmed. They eventually burned out. They cast warm, amber light that our ancestors' bodies could still interpret as almost night. But our screens, they burn with the intensity of noon, focused directly into our retinas. They never tire, never dim unless we force them to. They're always ready for one more scroll, one more check, one more moment of digital connection that keeps us from the analog connection with ourselves.
As you settle into your own rest tonight, perhaps you'll notice the small lights around you. The charging phone, the standby laptop, the LED clock glowing green in the corner. These are the new constellations of our bedrooms, artificial stars that never set. But what we're only beginning to understand is that this invasion of light into darkness isn't just making us tired, it's rewriting the fundamental code of our biology, shifting the delicate chemistry of rest and repair that our bodies have relied on for millennia. The true cost of our illuminated nights runs deeper than fatigue, deeper than groggy mornings and afternoon crashes. It flows through our bloodstream, settles in our organs, and whispers changes to our very DNA. Now we'll explore just how profoundly this gentle blue glow is reshaping not just our sleep, but our health itself.
You know that feeling when you wake after a restless night and your body feels like it's moving through honey? Your thoughts arrive a beat too late. Your emotions sit closer to the surface than they should. Even your morning coffee tastes different, more necessary, less comforting. That foggy disconnect you feel after one poor night? It's your body whispering the truth of what happens when we ask too much of ourselves. But what if I told you that whisper, for millions of us, has become a constant hum, so familiar we've forgotten what silence sounds like? Tonight, as we settle into this conversation about rest, let's sit with some gentle truths about what our modern world is asking of our ancient bodies. Not to frighten, but to understand. Not to judge, but to acknowledge. Picture Sarah, a marketing manager in downtown Chicago, jolting awake to her phone's harsh blue light at 6 a.m. She's had 4 hours of sleep again. The street lights outside her window cast their artificial glow all night. Her laptop stayed open until midnight, and somewhere in her restless dreams, her body fought a quiet battle it couldn't win. As she stumbles toward the kitchen, Sarah doesn't know that her brain spent those 4 hours trying desperately to consolidate memories, to file away yesterday's experiences and clear space for today's challenges. She doesn't know that without enough of those precious slow-wave sleep cycles, her mind is like a library where books are piling up on the floor, never quite making it to their proper shelves. She reaches for her coffee with hands that tremble slightly, not from caffeine withdrawal, but from a stress response her body can't quite turn off. Her heart rate, which should have spent the night in its restful rhythm, has been elevated for hours. Her cortisol levels are climbing like a morning sun that never quite sets. Sarah is living what 35% of American adults experience: chronic sleep deprivation that our bodies register not as adaptation, but as emergency. But Sarah's story isn't really about Sarah. It's about all of us carrying the weight of decisions made more than 2 centuries ago when the first factory lights blazed through the night and someone decided that human beings could learn to ignore their ancient relationship with darkness. Think about this. For nearly all of human history, we rose with the sun and settled with the stars. Our bodies learned to dance with light and shadow, to prepare for rest when darkness fell, to wake when dawn painted the horizon. This wasn't just habit, it was written into our cells, encoded in what we now call our circadian rhythms. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly productivity mattered more than biology. The electric light bulb, that brilliant invention of 1879, didn't just illuminate our nights, it began to slowly separate us from the rhythms that had guided our species for millennia. Now, 145 years later, we live in the afterglow of that revolution. 14% of the global workforce operates in shifts that ask their bodies to stay awake when every instinct says to sleep. Millions more of us bathe in artificial light long after sunset, our devices glowing like tiny suns in our bedrooms. We've built a world that never rests, and we're asking our bodies to keep pace. But here's what happens when we chronically override our body's deepest wisdom. It begins to rebel, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency. Picture Marcus, a long-haul trucker, fighting to keep his eyes open on a midnight stretch of interstate. His reflexes,
usually sharp, now move like thoughts through thick air. He doesn't know that his brain, deprived of adequate REM sleep for months, can no longer properly regulate his emotions or maintain his attention. He doesn't know that his cognitive performance right now resembles someone with a blood alcohol content of 0.10%, legally drunk. What Marcus feels is simply the fog, the weight, the sense that he's moving through his life at half speed. What his body knows is that his blood pressure has been climbing steadily, that his heart is working harder than it should, that his risk of cardiovascular disease has increased by 20 to 30%. His wife notices he's more irritable lately, quicker to anger, slower to laugh. She doesn't know that chronic sleep loss has disrupted the delicate balance between his prefrontal cortex, the brain's voice of reason, and his amygdala, the ancient alarm system that interprets the world as more threatening than it actually is. This is how sleep deprivation writes itself into our lives, not with dramatic collapse, but with a slow erosion of the qualities that make us most human: our patience, our creativity, our capacity for joy.
Consider Elena, a night shift nurse who has spent 3 years caring for others, while her own body sends increasingly urgent distress signals. Her appetite has changed. She finds herself reaching for sugary snacks during those long 3 a.m. hours, never quite satisfied. She doesn't know that sleep deprivation has altered her body's production of leptin, the hormone that whispers, "You've had enough," and increased her ghrelin, the hormone that demands more, more, more. Her body, confused by artificial light and irregular eating, no longer knows when to expect nourishment. Her insulin sensitivity has decreased, setting the stage for type 2 diabetes. Her risk has increased by 28%, though she won't know this for years. Elena's story echoes in millions of lives. The 45% increased risk of obesity for those sleeping less than 6 hours. The bodies that, deprived of rest, begin storing energy as if preparing for famine. The metabolisms that slow and stumble, no longer able to dance to the rhythms that once guided them. Walk through any major city at midnight, and you'll see our modern predicament illuminated in stark relief. The streetlights create an artificial day that never ends. The apartment windows glow with the blue light of screens. The 24-hour businesses hum with activity that would have been impossible before electricity. Urban dwellers sleep 30 to 60 minutes less per night than their rural counterparts. They experience sleep 30 to 40% less efficiently. Their rest fragmented by noise, light, and the constant stimulation of city life. Their melatonin production, suppressed by the artificial brightness that surrounds them, struggles to signal when night has truly come. This isn't about city versus country. It's about recognizing how far we've drifted from the conditions our bodies were designed for. How many of us have forgotten what true darkness looks like? How many haven't seen a sky full of stars in years? Perhaps most heartbreaking is what chronic sleep loss does to our emotional lives. Dr. Martinez, a resident physician working 18-hour shifts, finds herself crying during her commute home, though she can't quite say why. The beauty she once found in small moments, a patient's grateful smile, her daughter's laughter, feels muted, distant. She doesn't know that her brain's emotional regulation centers are compromised, that her risk for depression has increased by 30 to 40%.
She doesn't know that the circadian misalignment from her rotating shifts has disrupted her serotonin production, the neurochemical foundation of mood stability. Her experience reflects a larger truth. When we sacrifice sleep, we don't just become tired, we become less able to experience wonder, less resilient in the face of stress, less present for the people we love most. The cruelest aspect of chronic sleep deprivation is how it compounds over time. Unlike acute sleep loss, the aftermath of one all-nighter that recovery sleep can repair, chronic deprivation creates what researchers call allostatic load, the accumulated wear and tear of constantly asking our bodies to do what they weren't designed to do. James, a software engineer who has averaged 5 hours of sleep nightly for a decade, doesn't feel dramatically impaired anymore. His body has adapted, or so it seems. But beneath the surface, inflammation courses through his system. His immune function has quietly weakened. He catches every cold that passes through the office. His brain-derived neurotrophic factor, crucial for forming new neural pathways, has decreased, potentially setting the stage for cognitive decline decades in the future. This is how sleep debt truly works, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow erosion of resilience, a gradual withdrawal from the account of our future health. Perhaps most profound is what happens when our internal clocks, those ancient timepieces that have guided life on Earth for billions of years, fall out of sync with the world around us. Shift workers, travelers crossing time zones, anyone who regularly stays up past their body's natural bedtime experiences this disconnect. It's as if the orchestra of our physiology suddenly has sections playing in different time signatures. Our liver expects to process nutrients at certain hours, but we're eating at midnight. Our cardiovascular system prepares for the restorative work of night, but we're demanding the alertness of day. This internal discord increases our risk of heart disease, diabetes, and even certain cancers. The World Health Organization has classified shift work as a probable carcinogen, not because the work itself is harmful, but because the circadian disruption it creates may suppress melatonin, our body's natural cancer-fighting hormone. As we sit with these truths together, breathing slowly in whatever darkness surrounds us now, we might feel a mixture of recognition and sadness. Perhaps you see yourself in Sarah's morning fog, in Marcus's highway drowsiness, in Elena's disrupted hunger cues. This recognition isn't meant to burden us with guilt. So many of the forces shaping our sleep exist beyond our individual choices. The demands of economic systems, the design of our cities, the expectations of always-on connectivity. Instead, this awareness is an invitation to understand that our fatigue isn't a personal failing, but a natural response to unnatural conditions, that our body's protests aren't weakness, but wisdom.
What happens to a society when exhaustion becomes so normal we forget what energy feels like? When we accept interrupted sleep as an inevitable part of adult life? When we medicate our wakefulness with caffeine and our anxiety with alcohol, creating cycles that pull us further from natural rest? These questions aren't meant to overwhelm, but to illuminate, because even as we acknowledge how far we've drifted from our natural rhythms, something remarkable is happening. Around the world, individuals and communities are beginning to recognize what we've lost. And more importantly, they're discovering what we might reclaim. There are people learning to work with their chronotypes instead of against them. Cities implementing lighting policies that honor circadian health. Workplaces redesigning schedules around human biology rather than industrial efficiency. There are those who are choosing to step away from the relentless pace to prioritize rest, not as luxury, but as necessity. They're discovering that good sleep isn't just the absence of problems, it's the foundation for everything we want to build: creativity, connection, resilience, joy. As we prepare to close this gentle exploration of sleep's true cost, let's hold both realities: the sobering recognition of what chronic sleep loss takes from us, and the emerging possibility of what we might recover. Because perhaps the most revolutionary act in our always-on world isn't working harder or staying up later. Perhaps it's choosing to rest deeply, to honor the ancient wisdom of our bodies, to remember that we are not machines designed for constant productivity, but living beings who need darkness to see the light. What would it take for us to truly rest again? What would we discover about ourselves, about our communities, about our capacity for presence and peace if we chose to prioritize sleep not as time stolen from life, but as the foundation that makes life worth living? For all this damage, there are still those who walk away from the industrial clock, stepping into a slower, darker world. Imagine for a moment waking not to the piercing shriek of an alarm, but to the first gentle light creeping through your window. No buzzing phone on the nightstand, no immediate flood of notifications. Just you emerging slowly from dreams as your body naturally completes its ancient dance with darkness and dawn. This isn't just nostalgic fantasy. Right now, in mountain villages tucked away from the world's electric hum, in off-grid homesteads where candlelight still marks the passage of evening, in cities where workers are successfully fighting for their right to rest, people are quietly reclaiming something we thought we'd lost forever: the shape of our nights.
There's a movement growing, soft as morning mist, but persistent as the tide. It doesn't march with banners or shout from platforms. Instead, it whispers, "What if we could choose differently?" In Iceland, entire companies have shifted to 4-day work weeks, not as a utopian experiment, but as a practical recognition that human beings are not machines. Workers report something remarkable. They sleep better. When there's time to breathe, time to be still, the body remembers what it was designed for. Picture this: a family in rural Vermont living entirely off the grid. Their days are measured not by digital clocks, but by the angle of the sun. When evening falls, solar batteries dim, and the house naturally settles into quietude. The children learn to feel tired when darkness comes, to wake refreshed when light returns. Their bodies have never known the confusion of artificial noon at midnight. But you don't have to move to the mountains to taste this freedom. In Seoul, a programmer named May has discovered something revolutionary. She turns off her phone 2 hours before bed. Just that simple act, creating a boundary between the day's demands and night's embrace, has transformed her sleep. Her dreams have returned, vivid and restorative. Her mornings feel like gentle awakenings rather than emergency responses. In London, an entire neighborhood has convinced the city council to dim the streetlights after midnight. The result? Children fall asleep more easily. Adults report feeling more connected to the seasons. Stars, invisible for decades, begin to peek through the urban glow. These are the circadian threads, small, achievable changes that gently pull us back toward our natural rhythms. Morning sunlight on your face for just 15 minutes. Amber light bulbs in your bedroom. Consistent meal times that honor your body's internal orchestra. Blackout curtains that invite true darkness. If you could choose the shape of your nights again, what would they look like? Throughout history, artists and writers have been the guardians of what we're losing. Thoreau, writing by candlelight at Walden Pond, captured something essential: the profound rest that comes from living in harmony with natural cycles. Contemporary artists create installations about light pollution, not as abstract critique, but as urgent reminder of what darkness offers. In rural Ireland, a historian has documented something fascinating. Elderly residents still remember their grandparents practicing segmented sleep. First sleep from sunset until around midnight, then a quiet waking hour for reflection, prayer, or gentle conversation, followed by second sleep until dawn. What we might call insomnia, they called natural rhythm. What would change in your life if darkness became something you welcomed instead of fought against? The wellness retreats spreading across the globe aren't just luxury escapes, they're laboratories for remembering. Participants surrender their devices for days or weeks, and something remarkable happens. Their bodies remember how to be tired at night, how to wake naturally, how to feel the subtle shifts of energy throughout the day. A woman from New York describes her first night at such a retreat. "I kept reaching for my phone, checking the time, feeling anxious. But by the third night, I was falling asleep with the sunset, waking with the birds. I felt like I was meeting my real body for the first time in years." These retreats offer more than temporary relief. They're proof of possibility, evidence that our bodies, given the chance, remember exactly how to dance with darkness and light. You might be thinking, this sounds beautiful, but I can't move off grid. I can't quit my night shift. I can't transform my entire life overnight. And you're right. The industrial clock still governs most of our world. But even small rebellions matter. Even partial steps toward natural rhythm can transform not just your sleep, but your relationship with time itself. Maybe it's as simple as dimming the lights an hour before bed. Maybe it's taking an evening walk without your phone. Maybe it's recognizing the small acts of resistance you're already practicing. Those weekend mornings when you wake without an alarm. Those camping trips where you rediscover the profound darkness of true night. Because here's what we're really talking about. Sleep isn't just a personal need. It's a form of resistance. A way of saying that you are more than your productivity. That your body deserves reverence. That in a world obsessed with never stopping, the simple act of surrendering to rest becomes quietly radical. Picture, if you will, a small house at the edge of evening, the last light fading from the western sky. Someone inside blows out a candle.
Footsteps across wooden floors, the rustle of blankets, the profound exhale of a day consciously ended. And in that darkness, in that surrender, something ancient and essential awakens. The part of you that knows how to rest, the part that trusts in tomorrow's light, the part that remembers that we were never meant to be strangers to the night.
We've traveled far together tonight, you and I, from gaslit streets to glowing screens, from first sleep and second sleep to the desperate grab for any sleep at all, from candle flames that danced with our natural rhythms to LED lights that burn with the cold fire of perpetual noon. And what have we learned on this journey through the long night of industrial time? We've learned that sleep isn't just rest, it's rebellion. In a world that profits from our wakefulness, choosing to honor the ancient wisdom of our bodies becomes an act of quiet revolution. Every time we dim the lights before bed, every time we silence our phones for the night, every time we choose rest over productivity, we are reclaiming something that was never ours to lose. We've learned that the Industrial Revolution gave us wonders beyond our ancestors' wildest dreams, but it also asked us to pay a price we're still calculating. We gained the power to light the darkness and work through the night. We lost the gentle rhythm of two-phase sleep, the sacred hours of the watch, the deep trust in our body's ancient wisdom. But perhaps most importantly, we've learned that this story isn't finished. In mountain villages where stars still blaze unpolluted by city glow, in homes where families choose candlelight over screen light, in the growing movement of people who understand that rest is a human right, the ancient patterns persist. They wait for us to remember. The truth is, beneath all our electric ambition, beneath all our caffeinated urgency, beneath all our glowing screens and buzzing alarms, your body remembers. It remembers the time when darkness was welcome, when sleep came in waves, when morning arrived not as an emergency, but as a gift. Your circadian rhythms, those cellular clocks that have been ticking for millions of years, they haven't forgotten the dance of light and shadow, work and rest, wakefulness and dreams. They're still there, still whispering their ancient timing, still hoping you'll listen. So as you prepare for your own rest tonight, remember this. You are not a machine designed for constant output. You are not a problem to be optimized or a resource to be maximized. You are a human being, heir to millions of years of evolution, carrier of rhythms older than civilization itself. The gas lamps that first stole the darkness, the factory bells that divided night into shifts, the electric bulbs that made sleep seem optional, the screens that follow us into our most private spaces. None of these innovations were inevitable. They were choices made by people who believed that progress meant conquering our own biology. But we can choose differently. The night is still there waiting for us. True darkness still exists beyond the electric glow. The stars still burn in skies we've forgotten to look up at. And in quiet places around the world, people are still discovering that the most radical act in our always-on world is the simple choice to turn everything off. Tonight, as you close your eyes,
You join an unbroken chain of human beings stretching back to the very beginning of our species. Every person who ever watched the sunset and felt the gentle pull of sleep, every child who ever drifted off to their parents' lullaby, every dreamer who ever woke in the peaceful hours between first sleep and second sleep, feeling perfectly at home in the darkness. The industrial world changed how we sleep, but it couldn't change why we sleep. That remains what it has always been, not time stolen from life, but the foundation that makes life possible. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not absence, but presence with the deepest parts of ourselves. Sleep well tonight, knowing that your rest connects you to something larger than the urgent demands of our illuminated world. Larger than productivity and profit and the relentless ticking of mechanical time. Rest connects you to the turning of the planet, the cycles of the moon, the ancient rhythms that governed your ancestors and that still, if you listen carefully, govern you. The long night ahead isn't something to fear, it's something to reclaim. One dream at a time, one peaceful darkness at a time, one natural awakening at a time. Close your eyes now and let the industrial clock finally fall silent. Let your body remember what it knew before there were machines to tend, or screens to watch, or alarms to answer. Let it remember the time when the only clock was the sun and the stars.
Come, walk with me one last time down that narrow lane. The same path we took at the very beginning of our journey, but everything is different now. The gas lamps are gone. The factory smoke has cleared. The electric hum has faded to silence. The stars above us burn as they did before we learned to compete with their light. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and wild herbs, of earth that knows only the gentle rhythms of season and weather. Here, step through this gate into the small garden behind Miller's cottage, the same cottage where we first witnessed the ancient pattern of sleep, where first sleep and second sleep flowed like tide and retreat, where the watch was honored as sacred time. Look up at the windows. No electric glow seeps through the wooden shutters. No screens cast their blue light on sleeping faces. Just darkness, complete and welcoming, wrapping around the small house like a blanket. Step inside now. Feel the rough wooden floor beneath your feet. The air is cool and sweet, carrying the faint scent of dried lavender and the last whispers of the day's bread. Up the narrow stairs to the loft where the Miller family sleeps. But tonight, you're not an observer. Tonight, you belong here. This is your cottage, your family, your return to the ancient rhythm of rest. Settle now onto the simple bed. Feel the rough straw beneath you, the rough wool against your skin. This might seem strange at first, after all your modern comforts. But notice how your body recognizes this simplicity, how it remembers
what it means to rest without buzzing phones, without glowing clocks, without any light at all, except the distant stars. Master Miller stirs beside you, then settles back into sleep. His breath is deep and even, untroubled by emails or alarms, or the weight of artificial urgency. In the smaller bed nearby, the children sleep the profound sleep of those whose days are measured by sun and season, whose nights come as natural as breathing. Feel your own breathing slow, deepen, align with the gentle rhythm of this sleeping household. Outside, an owl calls softly across the fields, answered by another from the far side of the village. The church bell tolls once, marking midnight, not as intrusion, but as benediction. This is the watch now, that sacred hour between your first sleep and second sleep, when our ancestors woke naturally to commune with the quiet darkness. But tonight, you don't need to wake fully. You can simply rest in this space between sleeping and waking, between the industrial world we've left behind and the natural rhythms we're remembering. Feel how your heartbeat slows, how your muscles release the tension of centuries, how your mind lets go of the urgent questions that seemed so important just moments ago. The gas lamps have been extinguished. The factory bells have fallen silent. The electric lights have dimmed. The screens have gone dark. There is only this darkness now, this gentle, welcoming darkness that asks nothing of you except that you rest, that you trust, that you remember what it feels like to sleep as your ancestors slept for thousands and thousands of years. The last light fades. Your breathing grows deeper, slower. The night wraps around you like the gentlest embrace. Sleep now, as humans were meant to sleep, in darkness that heals rather than frightens, in rhythm with the ancient turning of the world, in trust that morning will come when morning is meant to come. Sleep and dream and rest.